Welcome to the We've All Done It podcast. If you are struggling with some toxic work BS, you, my friend, are in the right place. Office politics are hard, and sometimes we are the fun in dysfunction. I am Kimberly Benoit, your host and author of We've All Done It, getting real about the role we each play in a toxic workplace. With over 20 years of leadership experience, and yes, my own toxic missteps, I will be joined by leaders just like you and I to explore common leadership situations that every leader finds themselves in at some point in their career. We discuss lessons learned in a judgment-free space because no matter how it feels, we aren't alone in our struggles. We all have our own BS, and we can support and learn from each other. Welcome back, everybody. I am so excited for today's guest and today's topic because, as you will see, this is one that I think many of you will recognize and probably have lived through. And what I'm talking about is when you are a leader and you inherit a struggling, stressed team. Oh, isn't that awesome? How many of you, because rarely do we get to create our teams, right? We normally get promoted in some role and we got to figure it out. So today's guest, which I'm very excited to have Andrew here, and I'm going to let him introduce himself, but we're going to talk about what are some things you do and don't want to do when you are that leader stepping into this position. So welcome, Andrew. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thanks so much for having me on. I appreciate it.
Well, before we jump into the topic at hand, what I would love to do is I want you to tell our listeners a little bit about you and why this is such an important topic for you.
Yeah. So my company, the Fango Group, we're a growth strategy company, and everything that we do is based on companies understanding that their value proposition from the view of their customer is much more important than what they think their value proposition is. So we help build those core strategies, and those core strategies based on the topic that we're embarking on for this conversation really is, how do you think strategically and work strategically internally? I remember in a role where I had to manage what was going on in the purchasing department. They were bringing in products that were going to be resold, for example, and really there the strategy was recognize purchasing. You have a customer at the end who's going to buy that product, but the key customer you need to worry about is the internal team. The salespeople and everyone inside is your customer. And if they don't want to buy your product, they're never going to sell it. If they don't see that value proposition, what's in it for them to sell these things that you're bringing on, your innovation, your new items, the things you're developing. So, it'll sort of lead into what we're talking about in terms of managing very distressed teams. Because a great deal of the work that I do has been or have done is being brought into distressed companies. A private equity group buys a company and they're failing. A manufacturing company's had the same employees for 20, 30 years. Aggression is running wild. And now we need to turn that team into a high functioning team where people actually like to go to work. And there's lots of cases and experience through that throughout my career where we've really had to strategically bring people together in many cases that are violent and hate each other at the surface.
So part of the reason why I thought it was really interesting bringing you on to talk about this is you're not like an internal employee that's coming in and has necessarily a full lay of the land. You're in a unique position where you're specifically brought in to a team that is struggling, that has to perform better. It's not an option.
It's
Things
both.
have to get better.
It's been both. There are companies where we become embedded in that company for a year, 2 years to do this. And there are companies where we come in as an outside and evaluate what's going on and coach the team leaders to get their teams to be cohesive. So it's kind of, I've done both.
So let's start with the fun part first. So let's talk about what would you say are some of the mistakes that you personally have made when entering shall we say, a distressed environment or a stressed team? Because it's always fun to talk about the stuff we didn't do right first.
Yeah. Well, the biggest mistake that you can make is acting before listening. It's when a project comes and you haven't seen the team yet, and the folks who are looking for help will give you their view of what the problem is, who the people are that are the problem, and all of the aspects. And the secret to all of it is usually the person you're bringing you in is also part of the problem. So you're getting their sort of biased view. And
Yeah.
if they knew what the problem was and they knew who the players and all of it was in the right context, they probably wouldn't be reaching outside the organization to get help.
Yeah.
So, many, many times we come up with a solution, and the first thing that you hear is, "Oh no, that's not what we do here." And of course, then the sarcastic response is, "Well, if it's what you do is working, what do you need me for?"
Yeah.
Uh, but yeah, the biggest mistake always is the not listening, observing, and more importantly, how to build those probing questions to dig deeper than "I don't like that guy and this guy's rude and this one doesn't do his job," and all the kind of symptoms, not the actual core issues that are facing those teams.
Yeah. I mean, speaking from personal experience, I've inherited a couple of situations that were less than ideal. And I wouldn't
Mm-hmm.
say necessarily the whole team was struggling, but like you definitely had my favorite is when you get the warning of like, so, just so you know, this person,
Oh yeah.
that kind of thing. And I would say the same thing. It's like I always found it very interesting because I always one felt like I was getting pawned, like the problem was being pawned off on me
Mm-hmm.
because you didn't actually want to do what needed to be done to
Mm-hmm.
solve it in the first place, which
Yeah.
immediately puts me in a position of I'm going to be a bad guy,
Mm-hmm.
right? So it's already creating some conflict of some
Yeah.
kind. And then secondly, I would say mistakes I have made is listening too much to the people telling me what was wrong.
Mm-hmm.
With like take instead of taking it in as just like good information, maybe putting too much value on it without going to your point, ask good questions and kind of forming my own foundation of what I thought was going on versus maybe what other
Mm-hmm.
people were trying to help guide me into seeing. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? So it
Yeah.
because it definitely colors your lens of how you're going to approach different people on your team, what strategies you might create,
Yep.
to quote unquote solve the problem that has
Yep.
been told to you versus discovering on your own.
Yeah. And the variety of core issues that make teams ineffective, aggressive, and all these things that we're talking about can vary. But a lot of times it's nobody listens to me, nobody values me. Uh, there's a culture of too high of a competitiveness between folks. Um, and then there's also, I mean, at the worst end, people that have just downright bigotry towards genders, religions, skin colors, and those kinds of things, which are the hardest ones to get past because these are innate in the human beings, and to get them to recognize that they have to get along sometimes. Those challenges can be the biggest. I've worked with companies that have teams that are split between people who speak different languages, and
Mm,
they've got recent immigrants that don't speak English, and they're a clique within the organization. I've been in companies where they try to do the equity inclusion, and they bring folks in that other people on the team have objections with lifestyle, background, belief structures, and things like that. Those are sort of beyond the scope of this conversation because
yeah.
those can be real challenges. Um, but usually the core issues that you're dealing with, you've got that one person on the team who knows how to solve a problem and nobody listens to them.
Mm,
Or the person who just feels like nobody even cares that they're there. I've walked in on teams, 6 guys working together, 6 men. They've been working together in the same cell in an organization for a year, and 2 of them could not name the other 4 completely. They're together working on the line, and their communication had broken down so bad from day one. They didn't even know each other's last names. They had nicknames, that was it, and they weren't
yeah.
nice nicknames.
See, that's so interesting because like I've been in situations where you had almost like a team bully
Uh-huh.
that like controlled. And so there was a
Mm-hmm.
lot of turnover.
Yeah.
And my people would say, I don't know why there's so much turnover. And then once you got in, you realized because you had one person that was so intimidating, but also protected.
Yep.
Um, and that was always my favorite was when the leader was like, I don't know what the problem is. And even when told and faced with the problem, still struggled to say,
Mm-hmm.
but I don't see that.
Yeah. I recall
Um,
about 15 years ago, maybe a little more than that, I was helping deal with a sales team. They had one absolute rock star in terms of numbers
yeah.
that everybody hated. He was rude. He was to the point that they're lucky they didn't get sued by some of the female employees with the kinds of things that he would say. Actually, some of the male employees probably had the right, as he was still of that era where if you wanted to insult someone, you'd call them gay,
Yeah.
that kind of thing. And we looked at the performance across the board of everybody there and the competitive nature of the team. And the final decision was he needed to go. And the question was, well, he's my top performer in the business. And I stuck my neck out there and said, with him gone, everyone else will take up the slack and grow. They're not growing because they spend more of their time dealing with his nonsense than being productive. And sure enough, within a month of the guy leaving, everyone else on the sales team's numbers increased. The people got along better. They were more productive. They were able to make more calls during the day. All of the things that you would want a sales team to do, because the virus was removed from the body, which is the whole organization.
I always think of it as like a shadow or a weight.
Mm-hmm.
And you can tell when that weight goes away because it's almost as if everybody breathes for the first time. So we've talked about like things that we have seen and done that maybe we wouldn't want to repeat. But so on the flip side of that, though, in your experience, what are some of the most important things to do first when stepping into this? So you've been told you're taking for however it's coming about. You've been told you're about to be a new leader of this team.
Mm-hmm.
What is the first thing you think someone should do when put in that situation?
I like to get the whole team together and ask very leading questions, open-ended questions for people to give me a feel for what goes on. Pretend I don't know anything about what the team does yet, and I want them to educate me. And I want success stories. I want to know where the bottlenecks are. I want people to do that. And I also usually ask for everyone to give me, and depending on how dysfunctional the organization is, prior to that meeting, everybody write down 5 things that they wish they could change in the building, whether it's the paint color in the bathroom to an actual function, and then list any bottlenecks in process that they're aware of. And I combine all of that before we get everybody talking in that meeting. We throw up on the panel the positives and negatives, and basically taking, if 5 people said the same thing, it goes up once, and talk through them as a team just to see how they interact. Nothing's going to get resolved in that meeting typically. What I'm doing is observing how they interact with each other, who belittles who supports who, and look at the family dynamic of this group that's there. Then after the meeting, with all of the supposed pieces that we're going to be working on, then I try to casually meet one-on-one with every person with prepared probing questions. In the meeting, we were talking about this. Is this something that you've experienced? You've been with the organization for how long? Has anyone addressed it? If you've got a problem, who do you go to? And I have a series of questions that I ask to then gather that data. So now I've got the family dynamic. I've got the individual players not in the family dynamic sharing their information. And then from there, and again, it could be anything. From there, then we start to actually look at, where are the real core problems, not what they told me the problems were. Where is the dysfunction that's recognized, and evaluate in that, do we have the right people? And if we do, what's lacking for their performance? And then there's also, depending on the level of what we're trying to do, there's certain profiles that I may have folks do. I hate the culture profile stuff and the DISC and there's other ones that we use, but to really get a feel for who they are, both in their private life as well as in their adapted work life, to see if there's more psychological issues. Not, I shouldn't say psychological, but
personality.
How they're wired as people in the workplace, to see, what are the incentives. Many times all of it is a misalignment in strategy. I'll give you an example. I had salespeople on the team once, and one of the guys, we couldn't understand why he couldn't perform. He wasn't selling. And when I really looked at what was behind it, if you went to him and said, hey, this is like a $25,000 commission if you can close this, what's holding you up? Oh, okay. But if you said to him, do you realize this is Rolex money? All of a sudden he would go, because he wasn't interested in the money. He was interested in what money buys and the prestige. And when we understood those motivators, we were able to get him going. Had another guy on the team, same exact thing. Money didn't matter. That didn't. Did you know that if you close this, it's going to make you the top salesman for the month? The prestige. It's all about what people think of me is why I perform. So, and as we started to really understand this with the different salespeople, we were able to create different conversations going through the CRM and going through their pipeline and all of it to deal with what really got them fired up more than the typical idea. Most people, salespeople are just money hungry. They like money. Some keep score with it. Some keep score with other parts of it. There's people, I don't care how much money I make, but look at all the lives I helped.
Yeah. Well, so a couple things there. So I'll start with the last one first and then back up a little
Sure.
bit. But one, I think what you're saying there is so critically important. Even if you have a high, like a good team, is you have to know what motivates your people,
Yeah.
right? And if you don't know your team well enough to motivate them, then you're never actually going to be able to have those conversations in
Hmm.
moving any needle,
Yeah.
period. But one of the things you talked about was like looking at the family dynamics of a team. And, because a lot of people get really weird, family work is not family. Totally agree. However, it is amazing that when you put people together, how they take on roles
Hmm.
that are very similar to family dynamics.
Hmm.
And especially when you have people who are stressed, showing up as the worst version of themselves. For lack of a better word, it's just a toxic team dynamic.
Sure. Sure.
Understanding who is showing up how is so important. So I like that you said that first. Like you pull them together to see them in action. Because I think that's more informative than what anyone can tell you is how do they behave in front of you
Hmm.
specifically? Because to your point, sometimes the people that are telling you stuff are part of the chain reaction of events.
Yep.
And so removing that, you actually get to see the team in and of itself.
Yeah.
Um, and I really do, and I like that you do the individual second because then you can start referencing things you saw, things you
Yep.
heard, things that were said, and helping start to develop your relationship and navigating what actually is happening here.
Yeah.
Because I think that for me, that's the most important thing is you got to really understand what's actually happening. Because just because people aren't getting along doesn't tell you what's actually going on.
Yeah.
You're seeing a symptom of some underlying
Yeah.
issue.
Well,
And you got to get to that in order to resolve the rest of it.
there's a nuance to it that's very important. And I love when people tell me that they have no bias. I'm not biased. I'm completely open, whatever. We all have biases. So to be able to kind of keep that bias in check while you're doing these initial meetings to whatever you heard before, whatever, during the recruitment process, if it's a job or the discovery process, if you're brought in as a consultant, you can't go into the room with that stuff. You want
Yeah.
to observe it with clean eyes. And that took a long time to sort of master being able to do. And I still slip up every once in a while. But it's the same way when I'm reviewing resumes. I
Mm-hmm.
typically cut the header off. I have someone delete them. I don't want to see names. I don't think I have a bias, but who knows? There might be a name that triggers me into some. I don't want to know how
Yeah.
old somebody is. I don't want to know what nationality they are. I don't, none of that. Um, because I don't know that I do or don't. I don't want to risk that somehow that would influence what's going on.
Well, and I think that that's fair. So, like, going back to what we talked about, if people are willing to give you information before you step in, you have to view that as well intentioned,
Hmm.
might be accurate, but also might be tainted.
And because that person may be one of the pieces, the catalysts for the problems that
Correct.
are occurring. Yeah. But it's,
Yes.
and then the next step is really once we've sort of got that evaluation in place, there's a lot of playing and testing to verify the hypothesis that you've created. If you're in the room and you see a dynamic and this person seems to be the trigger for everything, test it. See
Mm-hmm.
if that person some information that might cause them to trigger and see if it happens or if they behave differently because you've had such a short period of time involved, not to the point that you end up with a brawl on the in the
No,
front office.
but I think the important thing too is, what I want leaders to think about is you don't have forever. You
Hmm.
don't have to do everything immediately, but you do have to start figuring it out because you were brought into this role for a reason.
Hmm.
Um, and whether it was your hired gun coming in or you're an internal transfer,
Hmm.
they're expecting you to fix something.
Yeah.
And so I think the smarter you can have an approach, the better. And
Yeah.
again, that doesn't mean it's easy. I think this is probably one of the more challenging situations to step into is when you know you're walking into something that's fundamentally broken.
Yeah. There's a
Um,
piece to this too that just reminded me that we probably should have even gone back to the negotiation before the consultation, is to sort of set the parameters and the expectations of time.
mm,
Because I've been in situations where they're like, well, you saw the team, what's the solution? And I was like, I've been here 2 hours. And that was in the early days before I said, I'm not going to provide you. It's the same when I do consultation work where it had nothing to do with the leadership roles, but a company is looking to build their core strategy and looking at 10 markets that they think they can grow their business into. I'm not making recommendations until we've tested all of those markets and done our research.
yeah.
Otherwise, I'm just another guy guessing.
Well,
And that isn't what people pay for.
I think that's fair whether you're, again, hired, brought in,
Hmm.
or like you have to know what your success metrics are,
Yep.
and what they're actually trying to accomplish. Like I said, I think, I feel so many times we do great things for our leaders, but we can also set leaders up to fail. And I think in these circumstances, if you know you're going into a challenging situation, then have a plan.
Hmm.
And I think that's part of what we're talking about is you have to have a plan about how you're going to actually lead the team, because if you don't figure out fundamentally what's at the core of it, it's going to be very hard for your team to execute. Going back to your
Yeah.
example of that sales example, if people are so wrapped up in the drama, they're not actually going to do their job,
Yeah.
because the drama is going to suck all the energy and air out of the room every single day. And again, if you're having high turnover, then you're just spinning your wheels constantly trying to get people up to speed. You won't last very long until if you don't have a
Yeah.
good plan about getting to the bottom of what's actually happening. And sometimes that also requires you to be really honest and say things might get you in trouble. So like we talked
Hmm.
about, like, if there is, some kind of protected individual or sacred cow, like being prepared to be able to say that sometimes has to be part of the fix or the solution is we
Hmm.
can't have, to your point, your highest sale, your best salesman is your problem.
Yep.
Are you willing and ready to make the changes you need to make in order
Yeah.
for the team to function in a
Yeah.
healthy manner?
Another
You got to be
another
brave.
great another great example of that, and this has happened more than once, is that the person on the team that is the virus of the illness of the business is also very good friends with the CEO or the pet of the boss. The
Mm-hmm.
there's all sorts of inappropriate responses for names for that person, but
Yeah.
um, and when you call that out, sometimes you're done. Oh
Yeah.
no, that person is how dare you? That's the
Oh
best.
no.
Yeah, and then you got it. And the other piece of it too is when you're coming in with a plan, you have to have a flexible plan because I've
Yeah.
seen failed consults like this from others where they heard the upfront. They've got these exercises that are their generic response to getting team building, and if they had listened and done the discovery part of it, uh, maybe there was a different exercise or a different thing to do with the team. I know a guy, and I won't even say that we've ever been friendly with each other. He is one of these guys that's like Mr. Macho in his console. We're going to come in, we're going to take them, we're going to do paintball, we're going to do a ropes course, we'll build that team, all this high risk stuff. And yeah, but how first of all, how is that team building if you've got people who are adverse to that? That isn't what that is, and what's going on the team isn't a matter of people toughening up and being
Yeah.
macho and showing who's dominant. Maybe it's the complete opposite, and what you're doing is making things worse. And by the way, I've followed behind that person many times, and it was a much bigger challenge to do what I did because the exact opposite occurred. I learned this once. I had a team of folks, and we had suggested we really just need to do something together to get to know each other better. And I was at that time I was down in Georgia, in the northern part of Georgia, near where you could go whitewater rafting. So I suggested it to the team, and everyone was like, "Oh my God, that'd be the greatest thing!" Everybody was on board. And afterwards, one of the guys, I mean, ghost white, sick. And I was like, are you okay? He goes, I we're done and I'm still terrified. And I said, terrified? What? He goes, I don't know how to swim. I said, well, why didn't you say something? Oh, I wanted to be part of the team. He ended up quitting. And I had no idea. This is earlier in my career. I had no idea that a team building activity like that really wasn't team building with him.
Yeah.
And we just sort of bullied and made everybody do it.
Well, and it's so funny because like that's a whole separate topic of
Yeah.
interest, right? Is like what is true team building?
Yeah.
Because like you, I've had team building be, we went bowling
Yeah.
and that may serve a purpose.
Yeah.
We have done same thing where we've done team building where we did disc and all those things, and it was great, but then we've done nothing happened with it. So it was
Yeah.
like that was a great half a day
Yeah.
experience, you know. So, but to your point, I think it's and hopefully I want listeners to realize this, and this is partly why we have the podcast set up the way we
Yeah.
do,
Yeah.
is that it's in those moments that you learn so much about what is and what isn't good leadership
Yeah.
and how you have to think through things very differently. And that I think is a huge component of it as well, is a lot of times people, and I'm not saying this particularly for you, but I've seen it happen in general, is like, that'll be a solution. Well, they just don't know each other. If they just knew each other better,
Yeah.
they get along better. And then they slap some kind of very superficial activity out there that
Mhm.
everyone is performing, like it's a very
Yeah.
performative action, but it actually isn't helping you solve any core issue at all
Yep.
because again, until you know what the core issues are, you can't
Yep.
really kind of create probably the right team activity to get you
Yeah.
there.
Yeah. And it's, in this profession, I mean, the worst part of it is really when the person who hired you, the CEO, the whoever that person is absolutely the problem. That
Yeah.
they're the one who's intimidating the team, causing division, picking favorites, pitting people against each other. And basically the person who hired you needs you to be frank and honest and let them know that. And if you're good at it, it ends well. But
That in and of itself is an art. And maybe we'll have you
yes,
back to talk about difficult communicating up.
yeah, because
Because it's a very different skill than communicating to your team.
yeah, there was a company that it did not end well recently, where the CEO of the company, without question, was this dominating, malignant guy who just really enjoyed torturing his employees and couldn't understand why they didn't perform. And I'll have to be careful with the
I don't
conversation.
know about you, but torture
Well,
tends
I'll
to
give you
not
an
be
example.
it
I'll
can
give
be a
you,
motivator, but not necessarily the
oh,
one
but
you want.
I'm not saying torture like, hey, let's tie them up and whip them, but
No, but I mean,
emotional
it's
torture.
emotional torture,
Yeah,
psychological torture. It's the
yeah,
same.
yeah. Imagine having a person who's not performing come into the massive conference room, put your data up on the screen, and
Yeah.
as soon as the person puts the data up, takes a call. And the guy
Oh,
sits
I've
there
worked
for
for that
20,
person.
20, 30 minutes waiting for the guy to get off a call in a different language. So they have no idea what's going on. And then finally he gets off the call and goes, I don't have time for you. Get out.
Yeah. I've
And I
worked
mean,
for that
those kind
person.
of behaviors, and you're like, wow, and you want to know why the team doesn't perform. Interesting.
Yeah.
There's like 50 things wrong with that.
Oh, yeah. I
Well,
was like,
50,
I'm sitting here laughing.
52 I counted.
I'm laughing. I'm like, I've worked for a person. Sounds very similar to that.
Yeah.
But I don't ask you. So when we talk about leadership and stepping into challenging teams, and because initially you are always going to be viewed with suspicion,
Hmm.
you're likely going to get pushback. People, even the ones who are hopeful and optimistic, can sometimes be really hard to win over, and there's a level of resistance there. And I think in part because, you know, past experience has maybe burned them for being too hopeful too quickly. So one of the things that I've heard people struggle with is how to not take resistance personally, particularly when people are telling you that you like it is targeted resistance. Like
Yeah.
you are part of the problem.
Yeah.
You are one who you don't belong here. You don't have the right experience. You don't understand our culture. So how do you help someone, or what advice would you give for someone to not internalize that because it feels very personal when it's coming at you.
I usually start with methodology to get them to recognize it without being told. And that comes with experience in creating the right questions. So a person who is, and this is the extreme of the guy who's torturing someone is that's almost a lost cause. But somebody who's not getting people to accountable for getting things done in time with tasks that are dependent for the next task. So instead of saying, well, why aren't you doing this? Or, you must make these people accountable. Instead, do you think that they would be accountable if you tried this? Have you, and use questions that lead towards a solution. What else have you thought about doing besides what you're doing that might work better? Are
that's
there
good.
are there things that you thought about doing that you're afraid to implement because there might be negative consequences? So framing these things in less confrontative
Confrontational.
confrontational way. Sorry, I'm having a
Hey,
a senior moment.
it's all good.
But those kinds of things where you look at political arguments with people. I support A, you support B, you're wrong. No, would you have a different opinion of your candidate if you knew this rather than your person is this? It's a different way. You're trying to elicit a response in someone's brain that isn't a yes or no, but a thought. And in that, invoking that type of thinking usually softens the landing. But the other side of it is, when was the last time that you heard anyone talk about a consultant that immediately the mindset was, oh my God, what are they cutting and who are they cutting?
Yeah.
I mean, there's movies about guys who are professional, hatchet men, hatchet women going into companies and doing that. So the first part of it is to let people know I'm not here to jeopardize anyone's job. Although sometimes that happens, we're here to make this better so that everybody here. It costs companies. I had the conversation today with someone. What does it cost to hire the wrong person that's bad for your culture?
Yeah.
There's math out there. If you hire the wrong salesperson in a company, in a B2B type company, where your expectation is for the salesperson to earn between 100 and 125K with commissions, hiring that wrong person in terms of lost productivity, lost sales, damage to the sales team, and all of that, depending, is between $300,000 and $350,000. So, the entire conversation at the end of a total mess that you're walking into may be, let's take a step back to the hiring process, the onboarding and the training process, because this may have been what led to this disaster. Are your HR people filling seats, putting butts in seats, or are they hiring to the culture of the business and the right people for the job?
Yeah.
There's so many aspects it could be, but you can't walk in the door knowing that until you've started to do these evaluations with a clear mind that you don't have a solution yet because you haven't analyzed it. You can't make the data-driven decisions without data.
Yeah, I also I like all that. I also think in the moment when you're feeling most attacked is the moment that you have to breathe the most. Like, because I hear what you're saying, but I'm also thinking about, you're in a room, it's you and another person, and they're coming at you hot and heavy. And so usually when people are attacked, the first thing they want to do is defend. And so I encourage people to always, like, if you feel it, you'll know that blood pressure, it's that urgency to want to cut off. It's the urgency to want to get a word in. So my first thought for people is if you feel the attack is personal, then you need to check yourself quickly, because now you are about to become part of the problem, right? Because they're trying to suck you in. And the second thing I always tell people is if you're new to a team and someone is coming at you that hard, then they've probably lived through some stuff you probably don't understand yet. And so a lot of what they're coming at you with may feel personal. It is not personal. It is them trying to protect themselves in some way, shape, or form. And to go back to what you're saying, is that's the moment to start asking different questions. Very open-ended questions. To your point, not yes and no questions. You're not there to convince them of anything. Part of what you're trying to do right now is understand you're using the word assess, analyze, but try to understand, like, why is this person so mad? What are they scared of the most? Like, to your point, are they scared that their job's going to get cut? Are they scared that something significant is going to change? And of course, they're not going to tell you their deepest, darkest secrets right
Yeah.
out of the gate, but that's when you can start. And I will say too, if you get to a position where you really don't think you can control yourself, it is okay to pause a meeting and say, look, I feel like there's a lot that's been said. I think we both need to take a breather.
Yep.
And truthfully, in the moment, it may not feel good because you may, how people can perceive it however they want, but that's actually the good leadership thing to do versus you lose your temper or you respond in a way that you're not proud of.
Yep.
And that actually, to what you're talking about, makes the situation worse. That's usually because I always think about it in like terms of actual, like someone is stuck.
Yep.
There's fingers, there's accusations. I've actually had people, and I think I'm not alone in this. I'm sure you've heard this too, where I was told that I didn't deserve to be where I was, that I had no credibility. So anything I said, they didn't really care and they weren't going to listen to it.
Yeah.
And so again, my initial response was to try to be like, no, I deserve to be here. This is why. No. In the moment, that's not important.
Yeah.
What they're saying, just sit and listen and watch.
Yep.
And if anything, ask them, what else do you think?
Yeah. As a therapist, when I went through my training in grad school in psychology, one of the things that stuck out that was always the most important in dealing with someone, not in the workplace, but in any place, is you have to meet people at their model of the world.
Yeah.
And explore it to then be able to draw them to something healthier and better for them.
Yeah.
And I it's very rare that I take things personally. I mean, I've literally had situations where employees have threatened to cause bodily harm to me, take you behind the building and beat you because you're causing me to have to change what I've been doing for the last 40 years at this factory, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But if you can meet them where they're at and understand them with the language that they want, I don't mean language like different than English, but the way that they want to speak and listen and understand the underlying parts of it to connect there, then it's much easier for them to recognize for the first time, probably in years, that person finally got listened to. And that's one of those things that most of us don't experience very often, is someone who actually takes the time to listen and experience what we're trying to say.
Yeah.
And then from there, it's really, questions are so much more powerful because they elicit thought, not answers.
Yeah. Fear's a very, very strong motivator for a lot of things. And resistance is one of them. Outburst is another. So being mindful of our time and grateful that you've spent time with us today. I always like to end with one important question, is that, for someone who's listening, who is about to maybe inherit a team or move into a position where they know there's these challenging dynamics, what is if there's one piece of advice or one piece of wisdom that you would want them to know or think about or put into practice, what would you want them to do? What is that one thing?
I think probably the most important thing is to actively actually listen beyond the words, and from that create those questions that we were talking about, to really dig deeper and understand what's going on at that level, not the words that people are using in the moment.
Yeah, the one that I tell people is you have to be patient. It's like turning the Titanic.
I can't
You're
wait
not
to
going
be
to change.
patient. I can't wait to be patient. I'm kidding.
Well, but I mean, like, because there's going to be pressure on you to fix it fast, and people are not widgets, and changing dynamics takes time.
Yeah.
So be patient with your team, be patient with yourself, but have a plan.
Yeah. The problem didn't occur in 10 seconds, so I can't solve it in 10 seconds.
Correct. Yeah.
Well, Andrew, thank you so much for joining us today and for sharing what I feel is really important stuff. I think this is, if a leader hasn't found themselves in this position yet, they will at some point.
Yeah.
Because like I said, rarely are you ever in a position to create a team from scratch. So I think this is all useful tidbits and tactics to hopefully help people navigate it a little more effectively. So thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Hey, thanks for having me. I really enjoyed it.
Well, Welcome to the We've All Done It podcast. If you are struggling with some toxic work BS, you, my friend, are in the right place. Office politics are hard, and sometimes we are the fun in dysfunction. I am Kimberly Benoit, your host and author of We've All Done It, getting real about the role we each play in a toxic workplace. With over 20 years of leadership experience, and yes, my own toxic missteps, I will be joined by leaders just like you and I to explore common leadership situations that every leader finds themselves in at some point in their career. We discuss lessons learned in a judgment-free space because no matter how it feels, we aren't alone in our struggles. We all have our own BS, and we can support and learn from each other.